Chapter 6. The Storms. Aduma revelry persisted throughout the city well into the next 2 days. Young radiant faces, full of wine and whimsy, poured into and out of taverns and dance halls, often drunk with joy and desire. But the noble and middle classes loudly complained. One merchant complained, "Our sovereign has created a public health and safety crisis. These damned Aduma are infesting every public house. They're urinating, defecating, and copulating right out in public, and generally making life in the city unbearable. Except for a handful of instances of misconduct and overexuberance, such stories were lies." Unable to keep up with all of the complaints about the public conduct of the Aduma, First Minister Ko-Toure conferred with Chief Peace Officer Sir No-Duro, his nephew. Ko-Toure invited No-Duro to sit next to him on his ministerial throne of office. "You say that the Aduma are generally well-behaved, although a bit zealous." "Yes, uncle. My constables have cracked a few heads and made several dozen arrests. But generally, the public order has been maintained. I will not tolerate anything else." "I see. This is good, nephew. Another reason I have asked you here is to share some serious information that I have just received that is of a rather delicate nature. I need for you to be present for the sovereign's audience with the Council of Lords and the orders of the priesthood, and I have a second special assignment for you." "Yes, my lord." Amidst the murmur of tavern conversation, 2 men, dressed impeccably in the orange and gold of Lord Ko-Toure's house colors, sat down in front of Bata. Bata did not know who they were, but he knew they were not Aduma like him. He almost did not care, except men with their bearing could be useful to his pockets, unless they were coming to empty his pockets or to fill a jail cell with more Aduma like him. "Mr. Bata, we thank you for seeing us." "Mr. Bata." Rakana men like them did not refer to Aduma with such respectful honorifics. Numerous times Bata had to fight such men who called him by the derogatory racist term for Aduma in Rakanese slang, "fire pucks." Maybe emancipation indeed brought a new day. Bata had always been a free man. He was part of a small class of Aduma who were free and not enslaved to the mines or crop fields, though they were not considered full citizens of the realm. Once Bata served briefly in the monarch's legions under a Captain Uhsa-Lata, but he hated the rigidity and disrespect he and other Aduma received for fighting for the realm. He had heard that the 31st monarch, the cruel father of the current monarch, had the ugliest contempt for Aduma. Women in the market said that the tyrant hated Aduma so much that he did nothing while faithful Aduma slave women were raped right under his roof. Bastard! Thereafter, Bata hated the house of Kanza and didn't fully trust the new monarch's sudden freedom decree. Probably a hitch to it. Still, Bata considered Uhsa-Lata a fair and honorable man. When Bata was discharged, he received at least half of his discharge pay due to Uhsa-Lata's intervention. The other half was deducted due to the military conduct demerits Bata had accumulated. To eke out a living, Bata sold contraband items on the black market, did odd jobs for wealthy clients, and generally stayed ahead of prying law officers. Bata purposefully shook his long, beautifully gnarly locks, leaned in, and crossed his well-muscled forearms on the table. He was a broad-shouldered man whose intense eyes, strikingly sharp features, and silver-tongued swagger gained the favor with many women and some men. Bata replied to the 2 men, "Gentlemen, I am all ears as to why you called this meeting." Bata looked around. In such a public setting, he took a drag from the glass of gold wine he had been nursing until these men arrived, barely hiding his disdain. The man with a particularly elegant turban and a robe ornately trimmed in gold, likely the boss, smiled and said, "As it is said, if you want to hide something, do it in public. I am Sir No-Duro and this is my assistant Garniton. We come bearing a generous offer." An unctuous smirk creased the man's face. There was something about this man Bata instantly did not trust nor like. Pucking Tafar, Bata thought angrily, using the Aduma word for their Rakani overlords. Bata's livelihood depended upon instantly sizing up others, and he was probably not wrong about this No-Duro. Reading Bata's expression, No-Duro added, "I know you do not trust us, Mr. Bata. You have no reason to. But I come with an offer, an extremely profitable offer, that in this new day will make you a rich man." Bata took another slurp from his wine. "To make me a rich man will take a lot of money, Sir No-Duro." Darting a cynical stare at the men, Bata's words dripped with sarcasm. You know that you first citizens don't let us fire pucks own our own piss. He put a fist on his hip while glaring. Bata was testing No Duro to see what he would say. Garneton flinched, but No Duro's face remained unreadable. I fully respect our new first citizens who happen to be Aduma, Mr. Bata. The old prejudices are tiresome and expensive. This is a new day in the realm, and I welcome it. It has taken far too long. Bata chuckled. Okay, Sir No Duro, thanks for the pretty words. Now why don't you tell me what you're offering me in exchange for? Garneton flinched again, this time visibly. No Duro halted him with a look and finished Bata's sentence. In exchange for the employ of your special skills. Bata leaned back and indicated with his hand. Proceed. Another slurp. It was an arid day in the grasslands of the northwest border, and General Uhsa-Lata personally took command of the 5th Regiment. He knew duty demanded he put aside his daydreaming about Deoti. Ever since the lords of the West Idari province had warned that the monarch's freedom decree would cause great dissension as well as financial ruin, Uhsa-Lata believed he had to force them to comply with the monarch's emancipation edict with overwhelming force. The High Lord and Governor of the province even personally refused to free his Aduma house slaves in clear defiance of the monarch's new law. Several small skirmishes between the Royal Red Guard, the elite monarch's legion troops, and soldiers from West Idari took place. None of these engagements were particularly bloody, but there were a few casualties and injuries on both sides. More on the side of West Idari due to the superior martial skills of the Red Guard. Each side was testing the limit of what the other would tolerate. Oto-Mani knew that he could not completely vanquish West Idari. It was one of the Earth provinces and the grain and fruit breadbasket of the realm. He did not want to prompt yet another civil war, despite the insolence of the governor and his allies. The realm and his dynasty had been racked with too many civil wars, and Oto-Mani had vowed his reign would be one of peace and prosperity. Besides, the thinning royal coffers could not withstand another prolonged war. Still, Oto-Mani knew, and General Uhsa-Lata advised, that some show of force was necessary unless he appeared to be weak like his brother, the so-called Oto-Mani the Feeble. So he gave Uhsa-Lata the standing authority to militarily intervene anywhere he thought his proclamation was meeting forceful resistance. For several days, fighting within small villages and hamlets persisted, but the larger engagements ended with a tense truce. Behind the castle mansion walls of the governor of West Idari province, a conference occurred between the High Lord Ko-Toure and his First Minister Nemi. They sat closely together and whispered in the High Lord's chambers because of the delicacy of their conversation. Nemi nodded his head and leaned forward to speak softly. My High Lord Ko-Toure, His Majesty is not pleased with the military resistance we pose to his troops entering our lands in order to reinforce his edict. After all, he is sovereign of the nation, even though you are lord of these lands. Ko-Toure responded. I know as governor I, in theory, serve at the pleasure of His Majesty. In theory. But with this edict, our monarch is violating the will of the Universal One, the protocols, and the goddess mother Idirama. Long ago, the Aduma were spiritually condemned to servitude for their supreme disobedience. Even the sovereign cannot change the divine balance of the universe. He does so at the peril of the realm. Besides, I've heard that the treatment of Aduma slaves was not nearly as bad as the abolitionists claimed. Yes, my lord, but the practical reality is that the sovereign cannot take back a freedom he has already granted. Presently, there is a truce between the commander of our troops and General Uhsa-Lata. He is a brilliant general, and it is best we do not provoke his anger lest he seek to keep marching on to our capital city. I agree. I am disgusted by the sovereign's actions, but I am not a fool. We will comply in as limited a way as possible with the edict and free a few palace slaves. But the Aduma slaves who work on our wheat, yam, rice, and fruit farms cannot all be freed at once, if at all. Otherwise, we will have no workers to bring in this year's harvest. With regards to the projections of rain and this year's harvest, my lord, Semi said meekly. Yes, Ko-Toure furrowed his brow in consternation. Well, my lord, some of our chief farmers fear there may be a drought. The rainfall thus far has been paltry, and the rainy season promises to be even worse. Worse would have been better than what actually occurred. For months when rainfall was most needed in order to produce a bountiful harvest, not a drop fell from the skies. Rivers, streams, brooks, and ponds all dried to dust until the earth was broken into great parched blocks. It was as if the land was a man's skin suffering from a gray ash disease. Verdant plains became desolate deserts. With no rain, there were no crops, and the bellies of children and adults began to bulge with hunger. Just because there were no crops, however, it did not prevent greedy landowners and royal tax collectors from still collecting rents and taxes from suffering peasants. Resentment simmered in proportion to empty pockets and hunger pangs. The faithful asked priests to intercede and to pray for rain to relieve the suffering. A few compassionate pontiffs helped, but most blamed the people for having insufficient faith. Thus, Aduma, the goddess of the earth and of prosperity and plenty, was angry and was cursing the land with no rain. Most priests collected sparse gold fire penitents from the people, and this further stoked anger and pain. Meanwhile, in the mines of Mount Ishi, Aduma free people grew angry because the wages they were promised to work in the mines were not forthcoming. They went on work strikes, despite the insistence of the monarch that these women and men were free and were due a wage. Mine barons and labor overlords dragged their feet. They reasoned that the drought in the west, as well as being a bad omen, increased food prices, made Rakana nobles and ordinary citizens pessimistic about the overall economy, and less willing to purchase items using fire gold currency, which sharply decreased the demand for the precious metal. Tensions brewed so deeply that elite members of the monarch's Red Guard, a few of whom were Aduma, were called out in their resplendent battle armor to temper the passions of enraged mine workers. Although there were many injuries, thankfully no one was killed. Days dragged on where once quiescent peasants threatened violence against the plantation owners if they were not given bread, rice, or yams to feed their increasingly bloated bellies. The cry of "We want bread, we want bread" could be heard throughout the lands. Eventually, the people could not take it anymore. Enormous crowds marched on Makana city and raided the scarce items found in the central markets, terrifying merchants and shop owners who, fearing riots, closed their businesses, thus further slowing already halting commerce. The people chanted in anger at the rich and noble born. "One less feast so the people can eat. One less feast so the people can eat." These fierce cries of anguish reached into and echoed around the opulent walls of the monarchical palace. Oto-Mani had been working tirelessly, conferring with governors, ministers, granary officials, constables, and a host of others to do whatever he could to feed his people. But it seemed there was not enough grain, not enough bread, and not enough money in the treasury to immediately allay the level of starvation that was spreading. One late night, Deoti found Oto-Mani sitting upon the fire throne with tears streaming down his face. He was deeply heartbroken. His people were dying from hunger, and he felt like he was indeed Oto-Mani the Feeble. Deoti gathered his beloved into his arms as Oto-Mani began to weep, unrestrained, like a lonely child. "Muzi," he shushed him as he felt this man's beautiful shoulders and back shake from a soft wailing sorrow. "Muzi, beloved, the Universal One and ancestors will not abandon us. We will find a way for this crisis to end." Oto-Mani sat up with tears and mucus rivulets soaking his face. "No, this is the beginning of the end of my reign that Mother Oto-Ma foretold. The realm will die from starvation." Deoti struggled to console his lover well into the morning. In the morning, the sovereign issued a command to General Uhsa-Lata and all legions in the city to take over from peace officers and constables, so to quell the disorder as gently as possible. The troops grumbled because they too were hungry and, due to reallocated treasury sources, had not received their month's pay. Nonetheless, Uhsa-Lata and his troops obeyed and a semblance of order was returned, at least to the capital city. Then Oto-Mani summoned the Council of Lords, and he made an extraordinary request from them. He stated that he, as sovereign, would relinquish substantial authority back to them to handle the affairs of their estates and provinces, if in return they agreed to loan the royal house an enormous sum of fire gold, as well as contribute huge portions of their reserve food stores. It was a desperate measure that no other sovereign in history had resorted to in a time of famine. But Oto-Mani the 33rd was no normal sovereign. The lords agreed, and suddenly, unexpectedly, surprisingly, there was just enough grain and bread to limit the scale of the famine. There was so much gold loaned to the royal house that the sovereign ordered General Uhsa-Lata and his troops to distribute 1 fire gold coin per every Rakana city dweller to further quell public discontent. This is what the common folk remembered as the Great Blessing. Oto-Mani, Deoti, and Olaria secretly wondered if the famine, or at least parts of the famine, were fabricated precisely because high lords, like Ko-Toure, wanted to deepen the crisis in resistance to the monarch's emancipation of the Aduma. They also suspected that Lord Ko-Toure was not blameless, but for a long time, they only had their suspicions based on the warning by Mother Aduma.
Now, good people, please like, comment, and subscribe to catch the next thrilling episode of Red Circles of Fire.